I'm very excited to get started on making the mosaic sample for this taster tutorial. One word of warning though is that often your mosaic changes a little bit from your drawing to the physical sample, and that's okay. The drawing is the practice run. Now it's the main event of making the physical mosaic. Slight differences between what you've drawn and what you mosaic is all part of the process. On my desk, I have prepared all the materials that I need. I have a substrate, and on the substrate I have drawn my template, and you will see that I have not drawn in the tesserae. I would consider that overcomplicating the process in this instance. I have drawn on the circular patterns and some indicative lines of the basic areas in the design. I have my tesserae drawing next to me, and I will be referring to that throughout the process. You can actually go so far as to lay your pieces out on your drawing and then transfer them over, but today I'm going to work directly onto my substrate, referring to my drawing for guidance. I have chosen my materials for this exercise, and I'm working with a high-fired porcelain in a range of natural colours. I have chosen this material and palette because it reminds me of the colours we see in the original mosaics. The adhesive that I'm working with today is thinset, or a cement-based adhesive in grey. However, if you prefer not to use thinset, you could use a weld bond or a PVA water-based glue. Also, you may like to change the materials to what you have available in your studio. This could be stained glass, vitreous glass, marble, smalty, or I find that students can effectively learn the principles of andamento and mosaic even using coloured papers. For my circular pattern mosaic sample, I'm going to start in the middle here in this square that is on a diagonal orientation. If I refer to my drawing, I can see that I've planned to use 9 squares within this section. I'm going to cut these and check how they fit. It may be that in your work you can fit 16 pieces within here. Always avoid cutting over your work because you might get porcelain or glass crumbs on the substrate that can get in the way when you are trying to lay the tesserae. Now that I've prepared these, I'm going to apply my thinset and then adhere my pieces. I'm now applying the thinset just to this little space. I'm using a palette knife and trying to keep it more or less under control here. Thinset can get out of control pretty quickly. I'm scraping the thinset into the substrate, and we can hear that scraping noise as we are creating a good adhesion with the substrate. Now that I have scraped my thinset onto the substrate, I'm going to smooth it out just with a wet palette knife to give myself a nice smooth bedding. Now I'm going to pick up each piece and place it gently on the surface of the thinset without pressing it down at this stage. This gives me a really good chance to check the placement of everything before I set it into the thinset. Once I'm happy with where they are and the spaces between them, I can press them down gently. The thinset then comes up around the sides of the pieces and hugs them from all sides, locking them into place. A reminder that in the center of this design, the interstices are aligned, in this case creating a bit of a checkerboard feeling. I'm happy with how the central square is looking. 9 squares work really well here. If your material is a slightly different size, you might find that you fit a different number of pieces within this central square. That's okay, and you can change the design to suit what you have available. It's now time to move on to the curved area that runs around the central square and hugs the outer leaf shapes. I'm going to start with the 4 keystone pieces that sit on the edges of the circle. To cut the keystone piece, the first thing I'm going to do is cut my pieces directly in half, just as I did before. From here, I'm going to cut off each side of the rectangle to create a keystone shaped piece, which is a gentle V shape with a flat bottom. If you are unfamiliar with cutting keystones, it can be helpful to draw onto the piece, to give you some guidance. So I'm going to draw a small diagonal line here, which will respond to one of the angled sides of the keystone in my design. Next, I'm going to trim that side off. I can then check this against the design, and this helps me to determine the angle I need on the other side of the piece. And now I'm trimming off the opposite side. And placing that on the substrate, I can see that that fits really well in this position. I'm going to now repeat that technique 3 more times to complete these 3 pieces. These pieces are working out nicely, and if you're less experienced, you will find that drawing onto the piece with a graphite pencil will actually help it to cut where you want it to. I've just finished cutting the 4 keystones, and you'll notice that the keystone shape is wider on the inside face here than the outside face. That's because the tesserae is widening in preparation for the line splitting off in 2 directions. So the next piece that we're going to cut for each of the 4 points here is the irregular pentagon. So this is possibly the trickiest piece in the sample, and it can take a little bit of time to get right. It's very important that in preparation for the irregular pentagon, which in this case is a stoppiamento because it is splitting the line around both sides of the inside square, it is important that the line widens towards it. So it feels like one piece is growing from the next, and our eye is given clear instructions on how to read the design. In the creation of these irregular pentagons, the first thing I'm going to do is cut a rectangle that fits between the leading face of the keystone and the corner of the square in each of the 4 points. Once we've done that, we're going to personalize the top edge of that piece and taper those edges to speak to this curved line. You will notice that the distance between the corner of the inside square and the leading face of this keystone is different in each of my 4 points. That is perfectly normal, and it just goes to show how you need to really personalize each piece for where it's going. In some instances, it may be beneficial to batch cut your pieces when you're using a lot of pieces of the same size and shape. However, with stoppiamenti or pieces that are splitting the line, they often require more care, consideration and personalization for the particular area that they are going to live. Cutting slim pieces off the side of the unglazed ceramic can be a bit tricky. Sometimes swapping to a wheeled nipper can help you to get those straighter, slimmer pieces. The other thing you might need to do is personalize the shape, is to trim or nibble the piece once you've cut it. Once I've cut the 4 rectangles which are sitting nicely next to the keystones, I'm just going to draw a little line on each of the corners that I'm going to nibble off. This line will track around the curve of this leaf. Next, I'm going to lift each of these pieces up and nibble the corners off. You'll notice that I'm swapping between the flat nose nippers and the wheeled nippers. When I work, I often have several pairs of nippers on my work desk, and I swap between them based on the cut I'm doing and the material I'm using. I do find that each type of nipper has its own qualities, and I'm often swapping between 2 or 3 sets of nippers, selecting the nipper that I feel will address the cut and the material the best at any given moment. The next step in cutting the 4 irregular pentagons is to run a line from the point of this central square out to touch this curved line. So often that will be running to the corner of the last cut that we made. I'm drawing a pencil line on the tessera here as a reminder of where I'm going to cut. The angles that I'm aiming for here are in response to this curved line. I'm not responding to the straight edges of the internal shape, but rather trying to respond to the inner curve of the leaf shape. And now trimming each of those corners off with whichever nipper you feel is going to work best for you. that we've cut these 4 irregular pentagons, we can all breathe a big sigh of relief because that's the hardest part of the entire sample. If you've managed to successfully cut these 8 pieces, you need a medal. These pieces are not easy, and the keystone and the irregular pentagon are really important and key pieces to know how to cut as you move forward in mosaic. If you found that frustrating, a little bit tricky, that's okay. You can be assured that the rest of the mosaic is a little bit easier. The next thing to do is to fill in the area between the irregular pentagons. And you'll notice that the thin set that I applied initially under the central square has oozed out the side a bit, which is what we wanted to do. However, it's going to get in the way when I'm trying to place my next set of pieces. So what I want to do next is to just use a sharp tool or palette knife to gently scrape away any of that thin set that's oozing out the side, because it's going to disrupt the placement of the next set of tesserae. I generally don't start scraping away immediately after laying the pieces because we want to give them a bit of time to start to cure and become more secure in their placement. When I refer to the tesserae drawing, I notice that I have planned 4 pieces along this passage here. Looking at this now, that might be too many. I'm going to cut 4 and see how they look. I could always change that amount and make it 3. I've cut and placed 4 pieces along this section here. On the next side, I'm going to cut and place 3, and then I'm going to compare them and make a decision about which one looks best. I've now cut one line that has 4 Sulima tesserae in it, and the other line has 3 slightly larger pieces in it. I'm looking at the 2 lines and thinking, well, which one do I prefer? Well, when I look at the line of 4 pieces, I can see that the interstices are offset from the interstices in the aligned central square. So that works well. However, they do look a little bit skinny, and because they're quite small, it sets up some visual contrast with the larger irregular pentagon. On this side, I have 3 pieces, and these 3 pieces are slightly more aligned in the interstices with this central square, which is not ideal. However, the sizing is slightly more uniform, and I feel that the scale of these pieces aligns more and connects the shape together more naturally. So I'm going to run with the 3 tesserae around in this middle section instead of the 4. This is a great example to illustrate to you that what you plan in the tesserae drawing does not always follow through to what you make in the mosaic. The drawing is the groundwork, and modifications can be made within the mosaic process to create the best outcome. I have now cut and placed the pieces that run between the irregular pentagons around the central square. Next, I'm going to adhere those with my thin set. I think the best way to do this is to remove one side at a time and work systematically around the shape. When you remove the pieces, it's a very good idea to keep them in order, because you'll be surprised how quickly you completely forget where the pieces are meant to go. Sometimes it can be really helpful to take a photograph of your placement before you move the pieces away. That way, if you do get confused, you can check back to your photograph. I'll now apply the thin set just to this area. Once I've smoothed out the thin set, I'm going to pick up my pieces and place them back in order. But remember, I don't press them down because I want to check first that the placement is correct. Once I've placed them, I'm going to adjust them and check that they are exactly where I want them to be and that they feel good in this particular position. Just a little bit of nudging and pressing here and there can make a lot of difference. Once I'm happy, I lightly press the piece down into the thin set bedding and I watch that thin set ooze up into the interstices, and I can see that the pieces are bedded nicely and locked into place. I'm now going to repeat that method on the other three sides. It can be beneficial to rotate your substrate so that the area you're working on is closest to you. This avoids you having to lean over your work, which can hurt your back. It also helps to prevent knocking pieces out of place. I've now finished setting this cream line that runs around the internal square. The next step is to cut and lay the leaf shape patterns. During the drawing process, we identified a number of ways that you could approach cutting the tesserae for these shapes. The style that I feel is most appropriate for this shape is where the interstices within the leaf shape are responding to the outside curved line instead of responding to the straight central line. This gives the leaf shape more of a rounded feeling and creates a clear difference between the 4 external leaf shapes and the internal checkerboard pattern, which is a much stiffer pattern. Before I move on to cutting and placing the pieces in the exterior leaf shapes, once again, I need to spend some time scraping back the thin set that has oozed out from underneath the cream tesserae. I have let this rest for a short time, so it is not too wet. If we remove the thin set when it is still really wet, we risk knocking all the other pieces out of place. I'm going to use different colours on opposing sides of this pattern, again in alignment with what we see in the original mosaics. So I'm going to use a speckled granite colour there and a terracotta colour there. The hardest part of the outside leaf shapes is the kite-shaped piece on each end. Remember that this is a stoppiamento because it is splitting the line from one point, moving into 2 lines and then back into 1 point again. So there is a kite shape on each end of these 4 areas here. I'm going to cut the 2 end kite-shaped pieces first and then work through the middle sections. To create these kite-shaped ends, I'm going to start by cutting one of these tiles in half on an angle. You can see the angle that I've cut here. I'm going to pick up each piece and place the pointy end into each corner of this leaf shape. This is going to make my life much easier, and I hope it makes your life easier too, because 3 sides of this piece are already cut for us. All I need to do now is make one final cut between the center line and the angled edge. It can help to draw the angle that you plan to cut on the tile, because often when you pick it up and turn it around, you completely forget where you are, and often I cut it the wrong way. You can see I've drawn a line on there now. I'm going to cut it, see how it looks, and then maybe some personalization will be needed. Now that is not too bad at all. Maybe a slight nibble along this side will make it fit just a little bit better. And I'm very happy with that. Now for the other end. So a little line drawn on the piece from the center line of the shape out to the edge. Now remember, I'm responding to this outer curve here. And remember that the line that I'm drawing helps me to remember my planned angle so I don't forget. Now that shape's actually pretty good. A little nibble will make it even better. And you can see now that these 2 pieces are fitting neatly into the ends of this shape, and the edges are responding to the outer curve. I'm now going to work along the inside line of this leaf shape, and what we can see when we look at it is that, roughly speaking, the width of this line is about the same width as half of one of these tiles. So a good place to start when making pieces for here would be to start with some half tiles. These can then be personalized to fit into this area. Now remember that on this side of the shape, we're aiming to respond to the inner curve. So we are angling towards the inner curve. On the outside of the shape, we are responding to the outer curve. So our interstices will angle towards the outer curve. It's always helpful to remember which line you're responding to when you're creating a shape like this. When we drew up the various options for this shape, if we respond only to the inner line, which is a straight line, we get a very stiff feeling in our mosaic. I've taken one of these half tiles and I've cut that in half on an angle to create two half keystones. If I pick these up, I might be able to fit these pieces into each corner. You can see that they'll need a little bit of personalization, but overall they're flowing quite nicely and responding to the inner curve, which is what we want to do on the inside of the shape. The bottom edge of the test here might need a little bit of a trim to respond to the inner line, to flow along the inner line. I can mark with my pencil what needs to be nibbled off, pick them up and nibble off those stray corners. I'm happy with the placement of the pieces on the inside row, so now I'm going to move on to the outside row. Remembering on the outside row, I'm responding to the outside curve. I fitted 3 pieces along the inside and I'm aiming for 4 along the outside. Again, I'll start with a half tile and an angle cut. And some trimming. As you can see, I've made quite a mess, evidence of hard work. I'm very happy with that shape and I think it works well. Each side is responding to a curve, so it feels like it has a little bit of volume. I'm now going to adhere that with my thin set and then move on to take the same approach to the other 3 areas. A little reminder to move the pieces off the area one at a time and place them in order on the side. Sometimes it works to move the pieces from this area of the design and adhere them on this area of the design, because essentially they're the same shape. However, I do find that even though these four shapes look like they're the same, they're actually not. There's a little bit of variation between them, which is something that I really like because this creates a more bespoke feeling. The design feels more natural and with a little bit of variation over the form. So in this instance, I would recommend picking up the pieces and placing them in order on the side, applying the thin set and then moving them back. Now that I've placed the pieces, I'm going to check their position and alignment and then gently set them into the thin set. The first of the leaf shapes is complete. Now you have 3 more opportunities to practice that design. 1, 2, 3, off you go. Once again, it can be beneficial to rotate your substrate so that the area you're working on is closest to you. That's our 2 terracotta leaf shapes complete. It's now time to move on to the opposing sides, which I'm going to mosaic in this lovely speckled granite colour. So I'm going to be brave and apply my thin set to this leaf area first, and then work directly into it. 3 down, 1 to go. Now that I have finished the 4 leaf shapes, I'd like to visually finish off this pattern by running a row around the outside. An outlining row is a row of tesserae which highlights the subject matter, often from a plain background. This design would ordinarily link in to another series of circles, forming a continual pattern of linking and overlapping circles. And you can see one of those examples in the resource pack, which is an extension option in one of the units in level 1, A Taste of the Classics. For the outlining row, I've decided to work again with the yellow ochre tile, as it will link back to the colours in the centre of the design. As this curve is relatively simple and unchanging, these pieces are all going to be almost square or a little bit angled, such as a half keystone. We don't need to apply a severe angle or a lot of bespoke cutting to this line. In fact, I could cut a whole lot in advance, which we refer to as batch cutting, and then lay my line in one go. As you can see, the pieces that I've cut are quite diverse. Some of them are square, some of them have an angle on one side, some of them are thinner, and some of them are broader. So overall, I think I'm going to try to use most of those around the outside. I'm not obsessing about getting the perfect piece every time. It's about getting a general flow around the outside of my shape in my outlining row. Good plan. In laying the pieces around the outside, I note that in the original, this cream line would extend and then link in to the adjacent circle design. So to hint at that, I'm going to extend the cream up into that outlining row and place one cream piece on each of these points here, just extending the shape out implying a little bit more of the original inspiration. How do you think that looks? I think it looks good. After all, this is an interpretation inspired by one of the classical styles. So you are free to change it around as you like. I finished laying the outlining row, and now I'm going to very gently clear any thin set away from the outside edge. You really don't want to leave that there overnight. If you do leave it overnight, you might find a nasty surprise the next morning, as it will have set like a rock. So whilst I've finished cutting and laying the tesserae, I certainly haven't finished the mosaic. As you can see, there's a lot of cleaning up to do and finishing off. So what do I need to do next? Well, it's very important that the thin set is allowed to cure. If you try to clean and poke and scrape too soon, you're going to dislodge the pieces. So I'm going to leave it for at least 24 hours to fully cure. Then I'm going to come back and clean. I have some pencil marks that I need to erase. I have a little bit of thin set on the tops of the tesserae which I need to wash off. Once the mosaic is clean and dry, I'm then going to apply a sealer. It is particularly relevant to use a sealer on unglazed ceramic. Unglazed ceramic has a matte surface, and I intend to grout this sample. If I grout unglazed ceramic without sealing the surface, I risk staining the surface of the tesserae with the grout. So to prevent that, I'm going to apply a clear sealer. So step 1, dry. Step 2, clean. Step 3, seal. Step 4, grout. Step 5, clean again. Step 6, paint around the side in a lovely black to make the mosaic pop. I really hope that you have enjoyed this taster tutorial from the Art of Andamento, Level 1, A Taste of the Classics. This gives you a little bit of an indication what each unit of the course is like: a theory presentation, a drawing demonstration, a making demonstration, along with a resource pack with all that you need to complete the sample, including templates and design suggestions. I hope that you'll be able to join me in the Art of Andamento in Level 1 or beyond, and I look forward to seeing you there.